Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for coming along this afternoon. And really, it's a terrific audience, so thanks very much. Now, I'm going to open this by saying that we definitely don't have all the answers. I can assure you of that. My esteemed colleague Igor and I are really technical people. We're not economists, we're not politicians, and we have some life experience, but we don't have all the answers. But one thing I'm absolutely certain of, that we have the answers within this country. We absolutely have the skills and the ability to change our national destiny. And there's no question about it in our minds at all. We need the best skills we've got. We need the best of our companies, our engineers, our airgrid, ESB, all of the skills, our environmental, our construction companies. And if we work together and we organise ourselves in a way we've never really organised ourselves before, Ireland can have a completely different future to the one we imagine at the moment. Igor and I are working on this, and all of our volunteer colleagues, we're not being paid, nobody's being paid. We're working on it because we're worried, like you professionals, about the state of our country. And we're worried about what we're going to leave future generations. And you probably all have children, maybe many of you have children. My own are around in their 20s and younger. And I am worried, I am concerned. I don't want to see our best and our brightest go abroad. And energy is at the heart of our economy. It's the heart of all economies now, and it affects everything we do, every piece of food and drink, every time we walk into a hotel, a bar, drive a taxi, anything. Energy is at the core of it. And if we don't fix our energy problem in Ireland, we have a very, very difficult future. So we're going to show you through a presentation. It's a strange mix of technology, geology, environment, economics, and politics, and anything on this scale you'd expect it to be such. We'll answer all the questions we can, and anything we can't, I'm sure some of you will have expertise way beyond ours, but we're also looking for more volunteers to work on the project, people of particular skills, professional skills, who may be able to help move the thing forward. Roughly where we are at the moment, we're working with good organisations like Airgrid, in Ryan's department, various parts of government, various politicians, professional bodies throughout the country, senior council, you name it. Everybody working in a spirit of cooperation. We're not getting any pushback, resistance from anybody. This is a big, surprising idea, and so it's taking a little time for people to kind of absorb it. But, obviously there's some cynics out there, and quite rightly so. Not everything about this project is perfect. No project ever is. But the idea is to, over the next few months, to kick it into shape so that by the end of September we'll be able to come back to the government, not asking the government to do it for us, but to come back to the government and the people of Ireland and say, look, here's a plan, here's the technology, here's the environment, here's the build costs, here's all the financing, this is how we put it together. Do we want to do it as a nation or not? So let me run you through it, and then we'll take any questions you have. By the way, you can interrupt us at any time, as long as, Liam, as long as we don't get bogged down. Please ask a question as it occurs to you. So where are we now? We're in a bit of a crisis. I think we know this. And we have cash flowing out of the country, although every day the hole in the exchequer seems to get bigger. So I'm getting a little worried that the Spirit of Ireland will be able to plug the hole quick enough. But we do have $3 billion a year in fossil fuels flowing out of the country. We could actually stop this. Now, we're not suggesting for a moment that we import no gas. We're not suggesting that. But we would like to get to a situation where, at least on the profit and loss account of the country, what we're paying for imported gas is matched by export and electricity. And then we could go on, because there is a shortage of energy in Europe, to export 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever billion euros worth of electricity a year. And obviously, if we added those up for a long year, we might be able to put 30, 40 or 50 billion into the pot. And that would do a huge amount to fix our NAMA problems. The other issue is, in the course of this, we can actually stimulate the economy, because it's a big project, but interestingly, it's a lot of small projects. So it's not one big bang. And we could stimulate the economy in a very important way to get people back to work, create an awful lot of jobs. We're working on this at the moment, and we think there's about 82,000 jobs in it, an awful lot of construction, a lot of manufacturing, a lot of towers for turbines, etc., civil works, etc. It would do an enormous amount to rebalance the development of the country towards the west, because most of our energy resources are actually in the west. And then we can create wealth in every single county in the country. There's no county that has to be left out of it. And by the way, it's an all-Ireland project. We're not suggesting for a minute that it's just the Republic. Unfortunately, we don't have all of the figures for the north, so some of our figures really relate only to what we can measure in the south. But it's definitely an all-Ireland project. Where does it start? It actually starts about poor land in the west of Ireland. Now, some of you may have seen an announcement of a West Clare wind farm recently, and they have a €200 million investment. They're ready to go in West Clare. They're actually part of this, and it's the first example of a wind farm cooperative, pretty well perfect example of 30 farm families controlling about 3,000 acres getting together to form an energy cooperative. They'll own it, they'll develop it, they'll operate it, and the wealth will flow back into the county. This is exactly the model that we want to propose. We'd like to see 50 of these throughout the country. And they would produce 50 of those would produce about 6,000 megawatts, which is an awful lot of electricity, which is pretty well in line with where the government wants to go anywhere. So we're not proposing something different. We're just proposing a different way to do it and to get there faster. The result would be that we can start a bedrock for our economic future as a nation. We can cut our cash outflows. We can open up investment opportunities. It would be hard for me to tell you how many people have come to us with related or ancillary ideas since we had launched this project. People have incredible ideas for everything from, development of all organic, 24 organic farming, to different ideas for running cars, etc. Just a huge number of ideas. We need something like this to create the momentum for other business ideas. So this will open up huge investment opportunities. We can slash our emissions problem, definitely, because we can take out, Money Point is a huge emitter. We can clean it up, we can spend a lot of money cleaning it up, but at the end of the day, we're still burning fossil fuels, and we do need to reduce our dependence on fuels. And we can, if we were to become significantly energy independent, now whether that's 60%, 70%, or 80% energy independent, indefinitely, the perspectives of Ireland change beyond all measure. We can also be good European citizens because Europe is facing massive energy shortages. And I'll show you some quite stunning figures about what Europe is planning to spend as a collective of 27 countries over the next number of years. Energy is, I don't need to tell you, is massively strategic, and we happen to have a bigger share of it than many other countries. So we can actually help our European neighbours we could, for example, save the UK having to build 1 or 2 nuclear power stations. So that has obviously a huge strategic benefit to the United Kingdom. Power is either the driver or it's the death of our economy. And I think we all stared death in the face when oil prices were at 100 and God knows how much per barrel. And unfortunately, they're heading that way again. And they're heading that way again, I think, I'm not an economist, but it seems that it's because the US economy is stimulating speculative investment. But what happens if oil prices rise and we're in the worst recession ever? We as a country are in serious difficulties. This is how we spend money at the moment. These figures came from AirGrid very recently, and I was actually quite surprised to understand. I didn't realise that our penetration of gas for power generation was so high. It quite surprised me. Obviously, the strategic issues of being so reliant on that amount of gas are considerable. Fortunately, there are good gas supplies, but still in all, that's a very large amount of gas. The coal relates really to Money Point. Renewables are at 11%, but that's the overall power capacity we have at the moment. It doesn't necessarily mean it's always there all the time, and that is the problem with renewables. In a number of years' time, the plan is that we'll be here. We'll have 40% renewables and 40% gas, and we'll still have some coal, but do we want the coal or not? But that's a decision for another day. There's a snag coming with the renewables. One of the problems is that the economics of the wind farming industries we know are currently collapsing. They just can't get the money. Even they might have good projects. It's taking an awful long time to get the projects through in Ireland for planning reasons, for connection reasons and other reasons, which are being dealt with by organisations like AirGrid. But we still have considerable and daunting problems facing anybody who wants to set up an energy project in Ireland. There is not a consistent national approach to this. And worse than that, even if there was a consistent technical approach, and at the moment, for example, many of the wind farms simply go out and buy the best equipment they can get on the day. These are not necessarily the right size, they're not necessarily the right height, they're not necessarily the most economical. Even when they get the planning, the machine may not be available because it's 3 years later. There are so many inconsistencies, and we repeat the planning process over and over and over ad nauseum. And the result is that the cost of creating energy in Ireland is 50% higher than the European average. We're shooting ourselves in the foot, unfortunately. So this target of 40%, we would believe is absolutely desirable, but we want to double it. We'd like to go to 80%. We don't think this target is going to be met, mainly for financial reasons. The wind farmers, the people who want to set up, simply can't get the investment now. And that will simply mean that people like Bord na Móna, the ESB, and a number of big corporations will be able to participate. But we're now going back to a dominant situation again, where only big commercial players control the energy market. So this was a very exposed situation still. We have huge strategic risks. You guys and ladies will be able to tell me much more about this than I can, but it all depends on where you stand on peak oil. I don't know the answer. I just know that, but Ireland we're at the very end tip of whatever happens in global energy markets. And it seems to me that there's a scramble, as a non-informed layperson, a scramble by the big economies like China and India, etc., to secure long-term energy supplies. So we can't afford as a country to be dependent on what happens, decisions made far, far away. The present plan, and these are the portfolio models that have been produced following much study by the regulator, the ESB, EirGrid, and the Department of Energy, on the different mixes that we could have of energy in Ireland. The preferred or the least cost portfolio is portfolio 5. So all of these were examined. This is new coal. It's not money point. It's new clean coal technology. But this is the preferred one at the moment. A very large amount of wind, a certain amount of interconnector to the UK to balance out the wind, and then the use of other power generators called open cycle gas turbines and aeroderivative gas turbines. The problem with this mix is that we still remain extremely dependent on gas, but it's also a very expensive way to manage our portfolio. The difficulty is wind. Wind is great stuff and it's free, but it comes and it goes. And the reason why we have so much continued reliance on fossil fuel here is because we can't rely on the wind. We have to have backup generation in case the wind fails. So unfortunately, the current strategy says we apply more wind, but as we do, we must match its equivalent with gas, fast-acting gas stations. And that is costing us money at both ends of the scale because there's an amount of duplication. But we also have the issue that this band, which is the current plan, is in grave difficulty for financial reasons. We have the same wealth generation capacity per capita as Saudi Arabia. We've approximately 68 billion a year of raw energy flows across the island, a quite staggering sum of money. So you can see we've an almost endless source of wealth that we could tap. We have some of the best wind resources in Europe. The purple bits are where the wind is. The Scots do extremely well, mainly because they have highlands and high plateaus. The wind gets pushed up over the edge. But we are really beautifully endowed, pretty well the whole island. Germany is way over here, just in our sort of central plains. And they are making an entire wind industry, but they don't have anything like our equivalent of wind. And their wind is north-south. Ours is north-south, theirs is east-west. So we have an enviable position when it comes to renewable resources. And obviously there's tidal and there's an ocean current, etc., which would be desirable in time. Unfortunately, we have about 1,200 megawatts installed, and on a good day, we get 1,200 megawatts. On a bad day, and this came off the EirGrid site recently, we got 70 megawatts. And nobody blames EirGrid for that. That's not their fault. The problem is the stuff comes and goes. So we have to do better than this. We have to have a consistent supply of energy so that the control centre and EirGrid can sit down and say, we want natural Irish energy on stream like that. They can't do that with the wind. And the unfortunate circumstance is often the wind in the wintertime blows at night when we actually don't need the same load. This is the quite staggering figures that come from the European Energy Agency. The expenditure to 2030 are 1.15 trillion on generating sources throughout the EU up to 2030. Of that, 360 billion will be renewables. UK spend on nuclear is 49. Ireland could replace 15 billion euros worth of UK nuclear energy quite comfortably without peppering the whole island in windmills. And our proportion of the renewable section if we were going after it, would be 21 billion. So it would be actually worth setting up a new IDA just to go after our sales of energy, because it's the easiest, the lowest hanging fruit you could imagine. But we don't have an energy industry. Let's be absolutely honest about it. We have excellent supply companies in the ESB, we have Viridian, we have people who supply energy and do a good job and keep the lights on. Well, that's their job. Their job is to supply the existing consumers in Ireland. We don't have an energy industry. We should have an industry. We believe we should have an energy industry. I mean, sitting on this wealth, this amount of wealth of energy, we should have an energy industry. It could be the next pillar of our economy. We have agriculture, we had construction, it'll recover in time. But we should have an energy industry, which is, a piston of our economy. So the question really becomes, how does Ireland organise an energy industry from scratch in a short space of time? And that's really where we popped up on the scene. Now, wind is our wealth. We have a lot of it there. We can go for energy independence in 5 years, and we could go on to export after that. This is the wind. This is where the wind is. The darker counties tell you the approximate amount of wind. This is an ESB slide, and it's not that Limerick and Clare don't actually have any wind. It's just that they wanted to avoid a kind of a gold rush to the connections at Money Point. So it was we played down the amount of wind we have down there. So most of the wind is in the western counties. Unfortunately, that's not where our wires are. So we don't actually have the heaviest cables where the heaviest wind is. So there is a plan to upgrade the grid, and about 3 billion relates to the spend in being able to capture the energy from the wind. And that will get us to our 2020 target of 40%. But supposing we wanted to go past that, and so what we're doing at the moment is discussing with EirGrid a number of scenarios where we actually went beyond that. Now, the consequence of that is that at the moment we're planning, I'm sorry this is a bit distant for you, you may not be able to see it very well. At the moment the plan is to upgrade portions of the existing network piece by piece. If we were to take it on the chin and say, right, we're going to have an energy industry, logically what you would do is you would build a 400 kilovolt transmission line from the north down the west and reconnect somewhere near Money Point. And that would give us the backbone on which to put our energy industry. There may also then be advantages in reconnecting through the north so that we have a meshed 400 kV grid, which we don't have a meshed 400 kV grid at the moment. So there are a number of scenarios which EirGrid are being extremely helpful looking at with us in terms of what we could do. But I think the answer to the question is it depends what we want to do as a nation. EirGrid is capable of building any network we choose, but we have to ask them the right question. So at the moment we've said 40% on a kind of an incremental basis. What Spirit of Ireland is saying, 80% on a gangbuster basis, because we need to stimulate the economy. And if we're going to do that, then we look at the wiring a great deal differently. I warned you this was a mix of technical and economics and political, so it's quite a collection. So the solution to this problem is we need windmills to capture energy. So we need those cooperatives I mentioned earlier on. We need about 49 more of them. They're the right economic size. That's why we're highlighting that as a good example. We need to store the energy, and we're going to explain, Igor's going to explain to you now why energy storage is so important. But it's obvious that the wind is intermittent, so if we can't store some of it, it's relatively useless to us. Sorry, I skipped there. We need wiring, obviously need wiring in the right places. We need storage, which Igor will explain. And then we need to circumvent the weaknesses in the grid. Now, we have a plan to circumvent the weaknesses in the grid up to 2020. But again, as we said, if we wanted to go for an energy industry, we'd look at the grid somewhat differently. Now, you know what it's like trying to build a power line in Ireland or any piece of infrastructure. It's not good. So we're going to have to do this as a nation. We can't do it incrementally so that, we protest village, house by house, village by village. This, we are going to have to look at something like this as a national endeavour. Otherwise, it's simply not going to happen. And more importantly, we won't get the investment to make it happen. Nobody's going to put money into Ireland unless it's clear that it's something we want to do as a nation. Turlock Hill, Ireland's only energy store. There's some storage in Ardnacrusha because they don't release all the water in one go, but it's not kind of a terribly controllable. It depends on rainfall, etc. Brilliant system built in Wicklow Mountains, 1974 at ESB. Beautiful piece of engineering, tremendously successful. Beloved of every electricity operator because it's so usable. You can just turn it on, switch it off, turn it on, switch it off. It's available in seconds. Unfortunately, though, it's now very small by Irish standards. And that's the problem. We need something, we need this, but we need it on a huge scale in order to be able to power the size of our economy now and into the future. Igor, would you like to explain what happened next?
Yeah, what we noticed is that as every country is unique, Ireland also has some unique features. And what is interesting is the west coast of Ireland is dotted with U-shaped valleys. They are glacial valleys. They are formed by large quantities of ice sliding down into the ocean millions of years ago. And due to coastal erosion, some of these valleys are facing right into the ocean. And a lot of these valleys are, they don't really have any economic value. You wouldn't even find any ship in some of these valleys. Some of these valleys you cannot reach by any other way by helicopter. It's not the places where tourists normally go. The ownership of many of these valleys is also unclear. It's so-called commonage, which means that the land was given to communities 100 years ago and people immigrated to Australia and nobody knows who actually owns what in many of these cases. So the idea is you can create large energy storage reservoirs in these valleys. What you need to do is you need to put a simple rock-filled dam, and you can construct this rock-filled dam by moving the material from one part of the construction site to another part of the construction site. It's a bit more technical, so I don't want to go into that, but it's a simple consequence of our unique topology. And these valleys are located in the areas of very stable geology. It's a rock of low water permeability. And what is beautiful is that your lower lake doesn't need to be constructed. Your lower lake is the ocean. So the water level in the lower lake stays constant. I mean, it goes up and down with tide, but this is small. And in this way, you avoid a lot of technical issues that you normally avoid when you pump the water, because the size of the lower lake is what often limits how much energy you can store. So what we're talking about is the valleys for the size, say, 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer. We identified about 50 valleys, over 50 valleys. They're in counties Cork, Kerry, Galway, Mayo, and Donegal, and it's a very, very good spread of valleys north to south, so you can pick up, the geographic locations you like. And they range in size perhaps from 1 by 1 kilometer, and some giant ones 4 by 4, 5 by 5 kilometers, but 2 by 2 would be kind of the average size. So the height of the dam you would need to construct depends on your appetite by how much energy you want to have. But you're talking about 70 to 80 to 100 meter dam. We're not talking about building a new Chinese wall. We're not going to be in the Guinness Book of Records. This is a reasonable sized dam, but nothing extraordinary. So this is something that can be constructed by perhaps 5 or 6 companies in Ireland. They have the capability to move that amount of material within about 18 months. It's going to be a large project, but nothing out of the ordinary. So one of those valleys can store enough energy to keep the country going for about 2 days. So if you are talking about 3 valleys, you're talking about a week supply of energy.
Now, what's the point of doing that? I mean, should you only supply a week's supply of energy? Well, the reason it's enough to get over the intermittency of the wind. Now, you could make the valleys much bigger if you wanted to have 2 weeks storage or 3 weeks storage. You wanted a strategic reserve. You could make them enormous if you chose. But what the real essence is that the wind varies throughout the day, or often maybe over a couple of days. And so you want to even out the variation of the wind. Now, why do that? Because all of a sudden then wind energy becomes economic energy. If you can't produce energy on demand, it's not terribly useful. It's nice if you can use it when the windmills are blowing and you can sell it. But we need energy at peak times. So has this been done before? Well, yes, it has. The Japanese did it. Now, one of the things we forgot to mention, forgive me if I flick back 1 second, in relation to Turlock Hill. In Turlock Hill, what happened is they basically carved out the top of a mountain, they built a kind of a moat, and they filled it up, and they dug into the hill, and they put the turbines inside here, so it's all very scenically beautiful, and they have a lower lake. So at night, when there's spare energy, water gets pumped up the hill into the upper lake, and then when they need peak energy the following day at 6 o'clock, when people put on their kettles, they let the water go back down again and generate hydroelectricity. Now, we don't have any more Turlough Hills in Ireland. Turlough Hill was a huge undertaking. It would probably cost about $2.5 billion to do it by today's standards. But we don't have them. And that's where Igor's idea is so stunningly valuable to Ireland. By using these natural formations, we can build Turlough Hills on the cheap, very cheap. The Japanese pioneered something some years ago, and that is seawater storage. In other words, what they did is they used the sea as the lower lake, because one of the problems is that you need huge quantities of water to do this. I mean, to generate that amount of electricity, you need enormous amounts of water. And we simply don't have any freshwater lakes we can bring up and down in level. We just can't do that. So the idea is to use seawater, the sea as our lower reservoir, and the isolated valley as the upper reservoir. And by doing that, it means we can build a very large power station of 1,000 megawatts for around 800 million euros. Now, that is a steal in economic terms. And if that then allows far more wind to be used, all of a sudden we've got a rolling train, a rolling economic train. So how does it work? Little animation here. In essence, in the new scenario, we take windmills which are located along the coast or in windy areas. We collect the energy from those wind farms, and we build a power station just by the sea beside one of these valleys, and we pump the water up into an upper reservoir, which we create through the simple rock dam, as Igor explained, and then when we need energy, we let it fall back down again. But now we connect onto the grid at 400,000 volts, 400 kV. And the reason for that is because we're doing far fewer connections, but at a much higher voltage. So we have a far more efficient form of connection. So at the moment, by taking the slightly incremental approach we're taking, we're making lots and lots of connections all over the place, and every one of those is costing a lot of money. And of course, that gets added onto the economics of the wind farm business, which then makes it more difficult to finance, so the whole process slows down. By rationalizing it all, by collecting the energy from the wind farms together, by sorting its intermittency out into a hydro station, which is instantly dispatchable, and by connecting simply to the grid at a higher voltage level, we've resolved a number of problems at the same time. There are Igor discovered about 50 of these locations around the country?
About 50 sites between 5 counties, but it doesn't mean that only those 5 counties would benefit, because obviously the neighboring counties pretty much could connect to the same reservoirs.
We only need 2.
We need 2, 3, depending on how much appetite you have, how much energy storage you would like to have.
Yeah, and there are some strategic issues. How long do we want to store energy? Now, the wind farms, is there an appetite for people to harvest energy in Ireland? The answer is absolutely. There's a huge appetite. At the moment, the regulator has a queue of 9,000, I think it is, megawatts. That's way in excess of what we use as a country at the moment. So now some of those applications are not very real, and there may be a bit of Klondiking going on and people profiteering, etc. But it would seem that there's an appetite for people in the west of Ireland to harvest natural energy that is latent. And a lot of it's driven by the land they live on. It's fortunate that where the wind is often some of the worst and poorest land, so it's the most marginal land for farming. And so logically, we would take the most isolated areas that are not tourist attraction, not frequented by tourism, etc., and we would use those isolated areas to create wealth in very remote rural communities. What would it look like if we built enough wind farms to reach, say, 80% energy independence, or even full energy independence? Well, that's about it. We've put the scale of the squares on the map. These sizes are typically 12 by 12 square kilometres, but we could also collect them together into denser wind farms and have fewer of them. And that's the area that we would be using if we collected the wind farms into larger groups. So some of these would be, say, 7 by 7 kilometres, and others would be 6 by 6. So we could have. So there's quite a variety of different ways we could organise this, but we're not talking about covering the whole country in windmills. In terms of financials, what's it going to cost? Well, the 2,500 windmills and their erection and their wiring will cost about 9 billion. But as we said, that's spread over approximately 50 cooperatives. Then we need to build the collection network to pull the energy in to get it to the hydro storage reservoirs. So there's about 450 million involved in that. We need to build 2 or perhaps 3 hydro storage reservoirs at 800 million apiece. And then we need to allow for the building of that grid connection that we mentioned from Donegal down towards Moneypoint, probably around another 340, 350 million. Total bill of 11.4 billion. An awful lot of construction and manufacturing work over a 5-year period. An awful lot. And then, but the cash it actually generates is around 2.5 billion a year, because this is a very cash generative business. As soon as the windmills start turning, you start producing cash. So in there's a few conditions on this in terms of, does it make this kind of money? Well, the answer is it does make this kind of money, provided the cost of the wind farms is reasonable, provided the cost of borrowing for the wind farms is reasonable, and provided it's done in a certain time scale with a certain standard of equipment. So there are certain caveats built into these figures. This structure was actually suggested by Brian Lenihan when we met him, and we think it's actually terrific. And essentially what he suggested is we would set up a national energy cooperative, and it would be a non-listed PLC. In other words, it would be owned within the by Irish people. Everyone in Ireland could subscribe, Irish pension funds, the pension reserve. It's not listed simply because we don't want the shares to kind of wander out of the country willy-nilly or go in great blocks to hedge funds. The money would come in, there'd be a public launch, it would be approximately 1 billion from public subscription, 3 billion from the Irish pension funds, 1 billion from the pension reserve, and the other, that's 5 billion. The other 5 billion would come 2.5 billion from the European Investment Bank and 2.5 billion from sovereign funds by way of debt. So it would be 5 billion equity, 5 billion debt. This would lend down and take an equity stake in the county cooperatives, where the cooperatives would put up initial equity, the National Energy Cooperative, or PLC if you like, would keep an equity stake, and then there would be a loan. So it effectively what you're doing is creating almost like a bank to fund this on a national basis. In terms of job creation, we're working our way through that with the CIF and with various manufacturing organisations and all the rest of it. The idea would be, in order to get the costs right, we need to manufacture certain components here. The towers are enormously expensive to transport. They're incredibly heavy. And transporting those towers from Denmark or from abroad is an incredibly expensive undertaking. There's no reason at all why they shouldn't be manufactured in Ireland. We bring in the flat steel and we roll them ourselves. And there are some Irish companies who can make concrete towers as well. The other hugely labour-intensive and expensive component are the blades for the windmills. They are enormous when you see these things. There's no reason at all why they shouldn't be made here. That accounts for approximately 50% of a turbine cost, but it creates an awful lot of jobs in the manufacturing. The foundations for these things, what we're proposing that we would only use 3 megawatt wind turbines. Many of the turbines being installed at the moment are just too small to be really economic. The payback period turns out to be 14, 15, 16, 17 years. That's really not a terribly fundable business. Bank managers don't want to hear that stuff these days. We're looking for a payback of 9 to 10 years, but that means using a certain economic size. The foundations for what these 3 megawatt turbines are huge. I mean, they're a serious piece of construction in their own right. And that puts an awful lot of groundworks companies together, steelworks companies, electricians, engineering, site surveyors, environmentalists. That gets an awful lot of people working. And at the current count, we think we would create approximately 82,000 jobs. In Denmark, they created 691 jobs for every 100 megawatts installed, and that there are permanent positions. So Denmark, the wind business in Denmark is now 10% of the overall economy in terms of generation, jobs, technology, etc. Huge benefits for Ireland. We can use our own energy resources. We can sort out our CO2 problems. We can really change, as the IFSC did in its time, as agriculture did, as a foreign direct investment did. Each one of those was an important switch for the economy at the time. We need a new switch for Ireland. This is one. We don't have to go abroad for external investment. No one can ever take it away from us. We don't have to beg to anybody because this thing is economically fundable. We don't have to go to the EU and say, give us the money, because we won't get it anyway. This one has a good economic model. It is fundable. If we don't sort this out, Mary Coughlin, I think, told you, Igor, that she might as well shut down her department because there won't be any enterprise. If we don't get electricity prices in Ireland down to an affordable level, well, there won't be any foreign direct investment. So this has the ability to greatly reduce energy prices and to stabilise them long into the future. It's privately funded, it's publicly funded, but it's not government funded. And it can do a huge amount. If Irish people believed that we were actually on our way back as distinct from on our way down, it would just change the natural nature of the enterprise and our own mindset. And we need a positive mindset to come out of this trough. We need national determination. We're not going to do this. At the end of September, you will hear from us again. We will have finished the plan. We'll have seen the sovereign funds, the European investment banks. We'll have done the technology with Igor, the ESB, and everybody else in between. And at the end of that, there will either have to be national determination, or this project will not move because no group of investors are going to invest billions in this enterprise on the basis that they might happen, or we might have 55 corrubs or something in between. In fact, I have to say to you, in the initial meeting with the European Investment Bank, the corrupt disaster played so much in the conversation, I was just not prepared. The damage that has done, for whatever reasons, to our national reputation, it makes it look like Ireland cannot organise a major infrastructure project. So we're terribly damaged as a result of that fiasco up there. We have the companies to do this. We have the professionals. We have the engineers. We don't need to go anywhere. We haven't built a large hydro power station since Ardnacrush 80 years ago, but there are amazing consultants around the world who are more than willing to work with us on the detailed design. Beyond that, we have the electrical engineers, the mechanical engineers, the civil engineers. We have the tools to do this. And then we need the government just to support and not get in the way. We have to change a few things. We couldn't work with the existing planning legislation. We have 4 senior council drafting proposed changes. And by the way, they were doing it entirely voluntarily. And 1 former Attorney General who believes that we've got to change things. So they're working on proposals that would see us be able to do a project like this in a much more fluid and dynamic way. We, as a group, our volunteers, do not have all the answers. And this has been a bit of a shock to us because we didn't expect to be facing some of these questions ourselves. We came up with an idea, we started costing it and engineering it, but we discovered that we've walked into quite a series of really important strategic issues that will have to be answered. How do we define energy security for Ireland? And I don't have the answers now, but we're going to have to answer them. And we as a people and our government are going to have to sit down and come up with answers to these because we're absolutely naked at the moment. How do we ensure energy security for Ireland? Do we want energy independence? How is it defined? What level of energy independence do we want? We're at 90% dependence at the moment. So what is energy independence? Is it 50%, 100%, 80%? We're just going to say 80%. So Spirit of Ireland are proposing 80%. But if someone else wants to say 70 or 100, we're game. We want to get the debate started. What proportion of electrical generation are we prepared to expose to external prices? Is it 90%? And that's where we are at the moment. If gas prices follow oil, we may be doomed. But is it 50% or 25% or 10%? Well, we're proposing 25%. So Spirit of Ireland said it's not reasonable for the country of Ireland to have more than 25% exposure to external costs. What's the right balance between price stability? One of the things this project does is it highly stabilises prices. The regulator was a little bit cross at me recently. Not cross, but he said, well, there wouldn't be a market if you guys succeeded. He said the prices would end up being stable because it doesn't matter what time of the day or night you produce electricity. There is no variability. We don't care about the price of oil or gas. He said there'll be no market. And I said, well, is that a bad thing? But nobody's answered the question yet. I mean, do we want price stability or do we want exposure to ups and downs? The theory is that the market will always produce the lowest price. What the market has done to Ireland is left us in a situation where we have the second or sometimes the highest electricity prices in Europe. I personally don't believe that leaving it to the market for a national strategic issue like this is just feasible any longer. They did exactly the same thing in the UK, by the way. They left themselves absolutely naked. How much energy we want to export and when? Is it in 5 years? We've heard politicians, and I'm not being critical of politicians, but we've heard saying we should be an energy exporter. Of course we are, but let's put a time frame on it. We're saying 5 years. So Spirit of Ireland is saying on the 6th year of this project, we'll start exporting energy. What size of strategic energy reserves do we want? I mean, we have a few weeks' supply of coal in Money Point. We have some oil. We have a limited amount of gas. So what remains a Kinsale. We'll have Corrib if it ever comes online. And, what level of reserves do we want? Not suggesting an answer, but we do need to have a national declaration on it. And what's the right balance between public or state development of energy and free market development of energy? When does the state intervene? When does it not? Our belief is that public development of energy is essential. It doesn't mean the state has to do it, but it does mean the Irish people have to do it. So concluding, you've been very patient. Oh, God. The solution to Ireland's energy, economic, environmental problem is straightforward. It's affordable. This is vanilla engineering. No one should leave this room thinking there's any rocket science here. I'd like to tell you there isn't. There isn't. There just isn't. It's basic electrical, mechanical, and civil engineering. We're ready to start working towards a national programme now. I'm delighted to say that all strands of government and all organisations are cooperating. We're not getting pushback from anybody. I think at the end of the day, though, everyone's going to say, well, this is such a big switch. We have to decide as a people whether we want to do this. Are we going to change the law to make wind farming easy, quick and affordable? Not, democratic, but affordable. Are we going to divert spend from the national grid from the present approach to a different approach? Are we going to deal with the compulsory purchase of 2 or 3 valleys so we can build these things in a reasonable time frame? So we have to decide how we're going to do this. The Spirit of Ireland group cannot make these decisions. What we would ask is you please help us. We are a voluntary group. We're not looking for money or begging or anything like that. What we're looking for is the very best of Irish professionals to lend us their expertise. An area of shortage of expertise within the group at the moment is economics. If any of you have particular experience in economics, macroeconomics, because people ask us questions about, what's the knock-on impact of certain aspects of economics, we're not in a position to answer them. We can answer engineering questions, costing questions, and other ones. So if any of you have particular expertise in that area, we'd be delighted to help. But if you have any expertise and you'd like to help us, please let us know, speak to us afterwards, or sign on to our website. Listen, thank you for your attention. I know it's a complex story, but appreciate your attention. Thank you.